Okay, it is the last couple of days in February, and that means it's about to be March, and March is a massive seed sowing time. So I'm just going to talk through the things that you can sow in March. You've got to adjust to this. Some of the things I want to talk about I've already sown because I know in my area I'm able to get them in much earlier, but there's still loads of time to get them sown. That is things like aubergines, peppers, chilies, tomatoes. I sowed my tomatoes last week. Okay, number one is beetroot. I'm doing 4 varieties of beetroot this year. Boldor, Chogia, and 2 of the Detroit beetroot that we tried out last year. We got some free seed and tried them out, and we were so impressed with them. We've actually gone and bought some more. So it is Detroit Rubridus 6 and Detroit Crimson Globe 2. So I've got 4 varieties of beetroot here, and I'm not going to sow them all at the same time. I've heard quite a few people like to wait a bit with their Chogia, find that it does better sown kind of late March, early April. And that's the same with the Detroit Crimson Globe. I'm going to go for April for those. But my March sowings of beetroot are going to be Detroit Rubridus 6 and the Boldor. So a good strong red one and an orange one. And then very, very end of the month maybe, or early April, I will sow the other 2. I'll probably end up doing 4 sowings of beetroot. There'll be March, April, May and June, and I'll alternate the 2. So I'll do these 2 first, then I'll do the other 2, then I'll do the other 2. So I will end up with kind of 2 sowings of each beetroot. That just really spaces out the harvesting time. Something else I'm going to do a similar tactic with is carrots. Number 2, carrots. I'm growing Touchon, which in my opinion is the best carrot going. I absolutely love it. In years where I've had terrible time with carrots and nothing's really growing, the one that I know is still going to go well is Touchon. I just think it's a great carrot. But so the 4 carrots I'm growing, it's Touchon. There's also a yellow one called Jaune Obtus, which is, as the name suggests, it is a yellow carrot. Then I'm doing 2 other long carrots, which are Amsterdam Forcing 3 and Early Nantes 2. So these are both renowned early carrots. They're both known that you can plant them early and they crop really fast. So I'm going to be getting those 2 in the ground first. The other 2 varieties I'm going to do as the second sowing. So the way I'm going to do it with the beetroot, I'll be sowing 2 and 2 over the space of a month, over kind of 3-week sections. I'm going to be sowing a line each of these in my carrot bed. That way I'm hoping to start harvesting my carrots in about June time, and then I'll be harvesting them all the way through till the winter. These are all long carrots. I often get sort of free seed off magazines and that kind of thing, and they often give you very short carrots. There's one called Globe, which is a round one, and there's also sort of Chantenay, which is a short, like little quite triangular one. I've just decided I'm not even going to bother with them this year. I don't need to grow short carrots. Short carrots are brilliant if you're growing in very shallow soil or in small pots or on balconies, in window boxes, that kind of thing. They're absolutely perfect, but I've got no need to grow short carrots, and it's just not worth it because they're taking up the same amount of space in my beds, but there's just not so much underground. So I'm staying well clear of short carrots this year. It does mean that I have an awful lot of packets of short carrots that I'm not going to use. So if anybody's interested or wants short carrot seeds, head over to the seed exchange. I'll put a list of what I've got available on there, because short carrots really do serve their purpose. It's just not something that I'm interested in growing. So I'll list them all over there. Next up, parsnips. So a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about various varieties of this, that and the other. And I mentioned that I had a packet of hollow crown parsnips. I'm going to give these a go, because when I said I wasn't very impressed with the name because it makes me think of something that's sort of rotted out down the centre, I had quite a few comments from people who've said they've actually grown hollow crown and thought they were a really top quality parsnip. So I'm going to grow them this year. I'm also doing one called White Gem, which I grew this year, which was just a really, really delicious parsnip. And despite the fact that they've started regrowing, so they're re-leafing, they're still tender and sweet and delicious. And I reckon they can be in the ground for another month, 2 months, and they'll still be fine. So if you are planting parsnips, remember that they are in the ground for a long time. Like I say, I'm just about to sow these this month, and I'm actually still picking last year's now. So they've got kind of a good month's crossover. So wherever you plant them, make sure you're not going to need that ground anytime soon. Another thing to say about hollow crown that I quite like is it's a really early sower. It says you can sow it in February, kind of February to April time, whereas white gem is more of an April to May sowing, so I'll sow them in 2 batches as well. Okay, sticking with the root vegetable theme, number 4 on my list is turnips. Turnips are one of those vegetables that previous to growing them myself, I really wasn't that fussed about. They weren't something that I really would go into a supermarket and buy a turnip. But since I started growing them myself, it was actually one year where I grew, it was this one actually, it was Petrovsky, which is a yellow turnip, and they were the most sweet, tender, beautiful things, and just steamed and then thrown in a pan with a bit of butter and a bit of salt over the top. Oh, so good. And since then, turnips have been something which is on my list every single year. This year I'm growing the same 3 varieties that I grew last year. Quite a good mix of colours. So there's Petrovsky, which is a yellow, kind of a butterscotch kind of yellow colour, and then I've got purple top Milan, which is white with a pink top, which looks lovely growing in the ground and also really delicious. And I'm also growing one called Snowball, which is just a plain white. Yeah, I'm pretty into turnips. Changing it up a bit now, my number 5 is peas. I'm growing 3 different types of peas this year. All 3 are ones I've grown before. In fact, all 3 are ones I grew last year, and I was really happy with the peas last year, so I'm sticking with what I've got. I've got a variety called Tall Telephone, which is quite unusual because they grow really tall, so you need a teepee for them rather than just pea canes. But they were a really good solid pea. Well impressed with them. You can actually sow quite a lot of these peas in February, but I tend to wait until March just because of space issues rather than anything else, and because they grow so quickly, I don't feel like it's a handicap to wait until March, but I will be sowing them the earlier side of March rather than late March. I've also got a beautiful Monge 2, which is another climbing variety. This is called Golden Sweet, and it's a really beautiful plant. It's got purple flowers with very yellow stems, and the Monge 2 themselves are a really beautiful primrose yellow, and I think this is just an absolute winner of a plant. It's really prolific. The only problems that I've found with it is last year we had a really dry, hot spring, and they suffered badly in that. They didn't enjoy it at all. So this year I'm going to be growing them in a more protected site because they were right out in the open last year. Talking of that, classic Hurst green shaft peas. I wasn't growing any normal peas last year until a neighbour of mine potted over, and she had started some off, you know, when you just put them on the damp kitchen roll so they start sprouting. She had started a whole packet and only needed half, so she gave them to me, and this is what they were. And I planted them up in the top bed where I normally grow the lettuces. It's quite a shaded bed, and actually that worked so well because, like I said, we had that really hot dry spring. They were completely protected up there in a really kind of cool but still got a lot of light, and we probably had the best year we've ever had for peas last year. It was just a really great year, so I'm going to try and recreate that this year with the peas, and I'm going to be sowing them early March, like I say, rather than late March. The Monge 2 and the Tall Telephone peas I'm going to be starting off in root trainers or deep pots at home, whereas the classic peas I'm going to be doing like my neighbour did and just laying them out on damp kitchen roll in the conservatory and wait for them to sprout, and then I will be sowing them straight direct into the ground. I always find if you're sowing peas direct, it's a good idea to sow them around the same time that you're putting up the pea supports, because putting in pea supports after they've sprouted or after you've sown them can be a bit tricky. So I tend to make my pea support, which I used the old last year's raspberry canes, and then sow the seed in amongst that, and then they'll grow up through, rather than trying to fit in canes after they've already germinated. Okay, number 6 on my list is something you know I absolutely love, and I do go on about it a lot, but it is chard. I'm cutting my chard varieties down again this year. I'm going to be doing classic rainbow chard, which I have got some growing in the greenhouse now. So I planted these around September time, got them into the polytunnel after the tomatoes had come out and the peppers, and then they've been sitting in there quite happily, just getting stronger and stronger, so that we're going to have a really good early crop of the rainbow chard. I did exactly the same thing with the Lucullus chard, but I will be sowing another lot now, which will be going into the ground around end of April, mid-May, and then they will be our summer crop of chard going into the winter. I'm growing 5 varieties of chard this year, which, believe me, is a reduction. I'm doing classic rainbow, like I've got growing in the poly. The other one that I'm doing that is another really thick stemmed one is Ford Hook Giant. Great chard, classic, really massive fat white stems, beautiful big kind of textured leaves. Absolutely love it. Great one. Gets to a really big plant too. I'm also doing one that's called Lucullus, which I hadn't tried before the sowing that I made in late summer last year, and we've just started eating it from what's growing in the polytunnel and in the covered bed, and it's a really delicious chard. It's a much finer leaf than, say, the Ford Hook Giant or the Rainbow. It cooks down very much like spinach, and it's a really snaz, really bright green colour. This is a winner. There is a fourth one I'm doing, which is Peppermint Chard. I've got to admit, it's very similar to the Ford Hook Giant and the Rainbow with its really big fat stems. It's a really robust plant, but it's just the most spectacular colour, and I need it in my life. So yeah, I've got 3 fat stemmed ones. I've got one really tender spinach like one, and then I'm also going to be growing classic Beetroot, which is known as perpetual spinach, but it is actually a chard. So that's the selection of them I'm going to be doing. Talking of spinaches, I am doing 3 normal spinaches. Can you tell I like leafy greens? The 3 spinach I'm going to grow are Manure, Mediana and Americana. So Manure and Mediana are both really prone to bolting. Going back to the really hot spring we had this year, had a terrible time with it bolting. It just would get to kind of this big and then you just have a flower spike. So with the spinach, what I tend to do is just keep sowing it. Every year the seasons are different. You get a really hot patch, you get a really cold patch, and they will just bolt randomly. If you're sowing them every sort of 3 weeks, just doing a row, you will get really good little leaves for salad. If they do bolt, you can just pull them straight out and pick off what you can eat from them. And you'll find that sometimes we'll just get a patch of weather that just suits them just right, and they'll really beef up, and then you will find that those plants then produce really good spinach leaves for you. You can plant this spinach all the way through the summer, and I will be. We don't know what the summer's going to do, but like I say, in the heat, it just bolts in a flash. The other spinach that I mentioned is Americana. This is a really beautiful spinach. I've got this growing in the polytunnel as well for a really early spring crop. I'll be sowing some more now. It does need a bit of cover. You get really big, fat, beautiful leaves, and I'm a huge fan of it. But like I say, with the spinach, it can bolt too. The chard, once you get it established, is much slower to bolt. So kind of having those 2 together, you can get quite a good crop of leaves all year round. Number 7, Pak Choi. Now the leafy greens is Pak Choi. I'm going to be sowing some more of this in March. I sowed some early February. Although they are tender where I am, they're year-round vegetable. I've got some growing out in the bed now, which are the ones that I planted out in November, and they've been fine all winter despite us having the coldest winter I ever remember having. Also got some in the polytunnel, and I will be sowing these on and off throughout the year. Just a line at a go, and because they're not in the ground for an enormous amount of time, you can kind of infill them with stuff between other plants that are going to be in the ground for longer. I'm doing 2 this year. I'm doing a red one, which is appropriately named Red Stem. I'm also doing Yushu, just delicious. This is another thing actually that can bolt quite easily in the really hot weather, but in that case I just keep persevering with it, and a bit like the spinach, you can eat them as baby leaves, and even in stir fries with a flower, they're absolutely fine. They just look pretty. They can be in salads or whatever. Okay, Alliums. I sowed a large number of Alliums right at the beginning of February, and they're all coming along really nicely at home in my conservatory, and I'll be planting them out probably late March, I would say, straight into the beds. But now I've sown them for about a month. About halfway through March, I'll be sowing my second wave of Alliums. So it doesn't matter if it's your first wave, still perfectly good time to sow them. That's for things like spring onions. I love spring onions and grow a lot of them. Lily is my favourite. I'm also growing White Lisbon and Performer this year. You can sow onions now. things like Isla Craig, like proper onions. I'm not growing any white onions at all this year. The things that I do grow are shallots and red baron onions from seed. Normally I grow a shallot which is called Zebrun, which I've always had fantastic success with, but couldn't get any seed for it this year, so I'm trying this one, which is Figaro. So we'll see how that goes. My red baron onions often don't get to large onion size, but they make the best pickled onions if you pick them small. So when they start hearting up, because we have problems with Allium leaf miner because they're in the ground for so long, if it looks like it's going that way, I just whip them out small and make them into pickled onions, and they are delicious. So I'm always quite happy to grow them, and we'll see how these ones go. I've already sown my main sowing of leeks. I don't successional sow leeks anything other than Nipper. Nipper is a little pencil leek which I really like to grow, and I'd just like to say thank you very much. I was sent these, I really appreciate it, because I couldn't get hold of any Nipper anywhere. And some of my larger leeks, if I have a really bad year for Allium leaf miner, the leeks are in there for such a long time that they tend to get completely riddled, whereas in a year when we've got a really bad problem with them, the Nipper are kind of in and out so quick that we don't have that much of a drama. So I like to do both, and Nipper's the only one which I will successional sow because they are so much quicker than the big ones. So I've done my major sowing for the big leeks, but it's in no way too late. Now is a perfect time to be sowing them. Number 9 on my list is Brassicas. A bit like the onion situation, I've sown the majority of my Brassicas for the year, the stuff that I'm not going to be successional sowing. So that is Brussels sprouts, kaleets, some of the cabbages. Some cabbages you sow much later. These were things like spring cabbage. I grew greyhound. I haven't got them with me today because I'm up at the allotment and they are all in my already sown box at home. But it is not too late by any means. Something that I will be successional sowing is the kohlrabi. I will keep sowing them over and over again. But the purple sprouting broccoli and all of those ones I've got in, but they are totally ready to go. I'll get a list up on the side of what I've sown and what is still absolutely fine to sow now. Right, number 10, lettuces. Loads and loads of lettuces. The first kind of point that they recommend you sowing them is February. I have put a couple of little gem in earlier. I sowed them kind of halfway through February. You can successionally sow lettuces from now, depending on the lettuce, all the way through the year. So these are the lettuces that I'm growing this year. I've got loads of them. I'm doing Little Gem, which is a classic. I said I've already got some of them in. Lettuces like all year round, slightly misleading. You can sow them now or sow them much later in the year for winter picking. Rip the bottom off this one, but this is Mazuna, really, really lovely lettuce. Bit frilly, bit bitter, but really fantastic with bacon, pine nuts and balsamic vinegar. Trying a couple of red ones this year. I normally grow Lola Rossa because it just looks great in a salad, and I'm going to be sowing some of them this month. But actually, although it looks fantastic, I don't really think a great deal of the taste of it. So I'm trying out some other red leafed lettuces to see if I can kind of find a better option. The ones that I'm trying are Red Salad Bowl, aptly named. There's Rossa di Taglio, which is not a red lettuce, but it's got a little attractive red trim. So that's another option. And the one that I'm really excited about is this one, Di Trento. I think I've grown this one before. I can't remember, but it looks very similar to one I've grown before, and it was also Frankie seeds, and it was so delicious. So I've got high hopes for this one, but they're the kind of the red ones that I'm going to be trying out. Also growing a lot of rocket because we eat quite a lot of rocket. We're going to be doing the two main types, which are the wide flat leaf one and the little skinny leaf one. And also I've got one called Dragon's Tongue, which has got a little red vein down the center. So that should be quite interesting to try. Going to throw some more corn salad in next month as well. I've got the stuff that's growing in the greenhouse. So it's 2 sowings of that, but it's now going to start growing much faster. So I'll get some more of that in. And then I've got Valmain, which is probably my favourite bog standard lettuce out there. It's a really great lettuce. It hearts up beautifully. You can pick from the outside. All of the leaves on the outside stay crunchy. You know, sometimes the lettuces that really head, you tend to get kind of slightly limp leaves around the outside and then the really crispy head. Well, with Valmain, I find that you get all the leaves on the outside that start to splay kind of remain really crispy. So you can use it as a cut and come again or a total head lettuce, and it's pretty good. Number 11, herbs. Okay, moving on to herbs. There is loads of herbs you can get started in March. Basil, can always get basil started in March. You want to be protecting it. It is not hardy in any way, so it's a window ledge jobby at this time of year. It is too early, I think, to start Thai basil. I normally start Thai basil April, May time. It's quite a late starter. Okay, dill and chervil, both of these are ready to kind of get started now. Again, inside in protection, so in a polytunnel or in a greenhouse or something like that, or on the window ledge. Parsley, parsley, parsley. I'm growing 3 varieties of parsley this year. I've got the classic flat leaf parsley, you know, the Italian wide leaf one. That's a real good one. And then last year I grew a curly leaf parsley that was called Lisette, and it was a gem. Really fantastic variety. So I was trying to get hold of that again. Couldn't find it anywhere, so I bought one that's called Champion as a tide me over, and then I found Lisette, so I'm going to be growing both of those curly types. I've already got some of these in. I sowed them a couple of days ago, so that's like just at the very end of February. But yeah, another thing I'm going to be successional sowing from now through most of the year, to be honest. I will also be starting off a bit of coriander. If you've been watching my vlogs for a while, you'll know I have a saga with coriander, but right at the end of last year, I think I was kind of getting the hang of it. So I've got high hopes for me and coriander this year. Something else I'm going to be starting off this month is some more sorrel. So I've got a row of sorrel growing outside. It's a perennial. I mean, we've had those ones in for about 4 years now. We've only got 1 row of them, and I want to set up another row to start going, because not only do we love sorrel ourselves, so I love sorrel in salad. It's got that really sharp lemon flavour, but with no bitterness. It's a real joy. Also, sorrel soup is a thing of the gods. But most of all, our chickens absolutely love sorrel. So we just want to get a bit more, because every day when we're leaving, we just take a bunch of the sorrel and tie it up and stick it in their cage for them, for a bit of something to do when we're gone. So we're going to be putting more sorrel in, and it's a herb that I didn't really use much of or have much experience of before I started growing it, and I would just really recommend it. I think it's an absolute joy. And last but not least, it is the radishes, and now's your time. I'm going to be growing quite a few radishes this year, because last year I discovered that there's so much more to radishes than I realised. I'm going to be growing mooli, which is the classic oriental radish, you know, the really big fat white one. And then on top of that, I'm going to be growing albina, which is just a plain white ball radish. Mum really took to these ones, so I'll be growing them for her. These ones I found were actually my favourite when roasted. So something I discovered last year, I've spoken to you about it before, was that roasted radishes is a thing, and it's delicious. So the white ones I found were the best for that. I'm also going to be growing a couple of long kind of French breakfast style ones, and standard red round ones. So I will be doing these for a mix of picking the radishes themselves. I'll also be leaving them to go to flower and to set seed, because the seed pods are delicious. Whew. Right, I've been talking for a long time. That is my recommendations for things to sow in March. It's by no means too late to be sowing aubergines, to be sowing most chilies. Definitely not too late to be sowing tomatoes. They're just all things that I've already done. If you're interested in hearing about the varieties of tomatoes I'm growing, my Saturday before last was a tomato seed sowing Q&A special, so I did a lot of talking about tomatoes in that one. Okay guys, it is an absolutely magnificent day. I'm up here in the shed with piles of seed. I'm going to go out and enjoy the sunshine. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday for this week's vlog. Just a small note, I just want to say thank you. I've had such beautiful messages from people about losing Fleur last week. I really appreciate it. I'll see you on Tuesday.